Every single morning at exactly 7:03 a.m., the calmest gorilla in the entire sanctuary would suddenly lose control, and no one could explain why. The first time it happened, staff thought it was just a bad day, maybe a random burst of energy, something animals do from time to time. But by the third morning, everyone was watching the clock, waiting for it. And right on cue, Kira would rise from her usual quiet corner, her massive frame tense, her dark eyes locked on one person and one person only, Emily Carter. She didn't charge, she didn't attack, but the sound she made filled the entire enclosure, a deep, echoing scream that sent a chill through anyone nearby, a sound that didn't match the gentle, almost human-like behavior she had shown for years. Emily had been Kira's primary caretaker for over 5 years, feeding her, talking to her, even sitting quietly nearby during long afternoons when the sanctuary was closed to visitors. And if there was one thing everyone agreed on, it was that Kira trusted Emily more than anyone else. That's why this didn't make sense. Every morning, Emily would walk the same path, carrying the same bucket, wearing the same routine like clockwork, and every morning, Kira would react like she was seeing a stranger, or worse, like she was trying to stop something. At first, Emily tried to laugh it off, telling the others maybe Kira just didn't like mornings. But there was something different about the way Kira stared at her, something focused, almost urgent, like she wasn't just reacting, she was trying to communicate. The other staff members weren't as calm about it. A few began to keep their distance during the early hours, whispering about safety protocols and whether Kira's behavior might escalate. The sanctuary director even mentioned reviewing containment measures if the pattern continued, because no matter how calm an animal had been in the past, unpredictability was something they couldn't ignore. But what made it stranger was this. Kira didn't react like this to anyone else. Not to the veterinarians, not to the interns, not even to unfamiliar visitors walking past the enclosure. Only Emily. And only in the morning. One afternoon, after a particularly intense episode that left the staff shaken, Emily stood quietly outside the enclosure, watching Kira from a distance, trying to piece together what had changed. The air felt normal, the routine unchanged, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. Kira wasn't acting out. She was reacting to something. Something specific. Something no one else could see. The next morning, as the clock approached 7:03, a small group of staff gathered again, keeping their distance but unable to look away, and Emily, trying to stay calm, took a slow breath and stepped forward, just like she always did. For a brief second, everything was still. Then Kira stood up, her entire posture shifting, her gaze locking onto Emily with an intensity that made time feel like it slowed. And as that same powerful scream echoed across the sanctuary once again, one question silently passed through everyone's mind. What was Kira seeing that they weren't? By the time the sun fully rose above the tree line, the entire sanctuary had shifted from curiosity to quiet concern, because what had once seemed like a strange habit was now clearly a pattern that no one could ignore, and Emily could feel the change in the way people looked at her, not with blame, but with a kind of cautious distance, as if standing too close to her might somehow trigger another reaction. Later that morning, inside the staff office, a meeting was called, something that rarely happened over a single animal's behavior. But Kira was not just any animal, and her actions had become impossible to dismiss. The sanctuary director leaned forward, his hands clasped together, speaking in a calm but serious tone as he explained that while Kira had never shown aggression in the past, repeated unpredictable behavior required evaluation, and for the safety of both staff and the animal, they might need to limit Emily's direct interaction with her until they understood what was going on. The words hit harder than Emily expected, not because she disagreed, but because something about the situation felt wrong, like they were all looking at the surface while missing something deeper. She tried to explain that Kira was not acting randomly, that there was intention behind those screams, but without proof. It sounded more like hope than fact. After the meeting, Emily sat alone outside near the observation deck, replaying every moment she could remember, every detail that might explain the sudden change. She thought about the past few weeks, her routine, her schedule, even the smallest habits that might have shifted, but nothing stood out, nothing obvious, nothing that could explain why Kira reacted only to her and only at the same exact time each day. That was what unsettled her the most, the precision of it, Because animals could be emotional, they could be reactive, but this felt structured, almost like a signal. Determined to understand, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. The next morning, instead of walking in at her usual pace, she stopped just outside the viewing line and waited, watching Kira from a distance as the seconds ticked closer to that familiar time. Around her, a few staff members stood quietly, pretending to be busy but clearly watching as well. At exactly 7:03, just like before, Kira shifted, her body tensing, her eyes scanning until they landed on Emily, even though she had not moved, even though she had tried to stay out of sight. The reaction came instantly, the same powerful scream, but this time, Emily noticed something she had missed before. Kira was not simply facing her. She was angled slightly, her gaze fixed not on Emily's face, but lower, as if focused on a specific part of her body. Emily frowned, instinctively placing a hand against her chest as a strange feeling crept in. Not pain, not even discomfort, just a subtle awareness she could not quite explain. The moment passed quickly as Kira calmed down once Emily stepped back, returning to her usual quiet state, as if nothing had happened. That contrast, the sudden switch from intense reaction to complete calm, only made things more confusing, but also more important. That afternoon, Emily approached the veterinary team, including Dr. Nathan Cole, explaining everything in detail, from the timing to the direction of Kira's gaze, emphasizing that it was not random. Dr. Cole listened carefully, his expression thoughtful, not dismissive, but cautious, and after a moment of silence, he suggested something that Emily had not expected, not a behavioral test for Kira, but a routine check for her. Emily blinked in surprise, asking why that would matter, and Dr. Cole simply replied that sometimes, when something does not make sense on the surface, the answer is not where everyone is looking, and if Kira was reacting to something specific, then they needed to consider every possibility, even the ones that seemed unlikely. For the first time since this began, Emily felt a quiet unease settle in her chest, not fear, but the growing sense that whatever Kira was trying to show them had not been discovered yet, and that they might already be running out of time to understand it. The following morning felt different even before anything happened, as if the air itself carried a quiet tension that had not been there before, and Emily could not ignore the subtle weight in her chest as she prepared for what Dr. Nathan Cole had suggested, because while it sounded simple, just a routine medical check, something about the timing made it feel far more significant. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every detail in her mind, especially the way Kira's gaze had locked onto a specific spot on her body, not randomly, not wildly, but with precision, and that detail stayed with her as she walked into the small medical wing of the sanctuary just after sunrise. Dr. Cole greeted her with a calm expression, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that had not been there before, and without wasting time, he explained that they would run a series of basic tests, nothing invasive, just standard evaluations to rule out anything unusual. Emily nodded, trying to stay relaxed, telling herself this was just precaution, just a step to eliminate possibilities, but deep down, she could feel that this was more than routine. As the minutes passed, the room remained quiet except for the soft hum of equipment, and Emily found herself staring at the wall, her thoughts drifting back to Kira, to those mornings, to the exact second everything would change. It did not feel like coincidence anymore. It felt intentional. After the initial tests, Dr. Cole paused, reviewing the early readings, his expression tightening just slightly, not enough to alarm her immediately, but enough for Emily to notice. She sat up a little straighter, asking if everything was normal, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully before saying that there was something they needed to look at more closely, something that might require additional imaging, just to be sure. Emily felt a small wave of unease rise in her chest, not panic, but a quiet awareness that something was shifting beyond her control. Within the hour, she was guided into another room for further examination, the process still calm, still controlled, but carrying a growing weight with each passing step. Meanwhile, outside in the sanctuary, the staff had gathered again, watching the clock as they always did, and at exactly 7:03, even without Emily present, Kira reacted. The moment was unmistakable. She stood abruptly, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the empty path where Emily would normally appear, and then came the same powerful scream, echoing across the enclosure. But this time, there was no one in front of her, no visible trigger, and yet the reaction was just as intense. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, because this changed everything. If Emily was not there, and Kira still reacted at the exact same moment, then whatever was causing this behavior was not simply visual. It was something deeper, something tied to timing, to presence, or perhaps to something no one had considered yet. Back inside the medical wing, Emily lay still as the final images were captured, the room quiet except for the soft instructions from the technician, and when it was over, she was asked to wait. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last, until Dr. Cole returned, no longer just thoughtful, but visibly shaken in a way Emily had not seen before. He closed the door gently behind him, holding the results in his hand, and for a moment, he did not speak, as if trying to process what he was about to say. Emily felt her heart begin to race, the silence louder than any words could be, and when Dr. Cole finally looked at her, there was a gravity in his expression that made everything else fade away, because whatever he had discovered, it was not something either of them had been expecting, and suddenly, Kira's behavior no longer seemed strange. It seemed like a warning that had been there all along, waiting to be understood. The silence in the room stretched for several long seconds, and Emily could feel every heartbeat echoing in her ears as she watched Dr. Nathan Cole struggle to find the right words, because whatever he had just seen was not something he could deliver casually, not something that fit into the category of routine results or simple reassurance. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable weight behind it as he explained that the imaging had revealed something unusual, something small but significant, located in the upper area of her chest, an abnormal growth that had likely been developing quietly without any clear symptoms. Emily blinked, trying to process what she was hearing, because she had felt fine. She had been working full days, walking miles around the sanctuary, carrying supplies, laughing with coworkers, and yet now she was being told that something inside her body had been changing without her knowing. Dr. Cole quickly added that it was early, very early, and that was the most important detail, because catching it at this stage meant there were options, real options for treatment. But the timing of the discovery was what left him visibly shaken. He paused, looking directly at her, and said something that made everything shift in an instant, that if this had gone unnoticed for even a few more months, the situation could have become far more serious. Emily felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, not just fear, but a strange sense of disbelief, because her mind immediately went back to Kira, to those mornings, to the exact time, the exact reaction, the way the gorilla had focused on that same area over and over again. It was not random. It was never random. Dr. Cole continued, explaining that in rare cases, animals, especially highly intelligent ones, could detect subtle changes in scent or behavior linked to biological shifts in the human body, changes that humans themselves might not notice until much later. He admitted that even he found it difficult to fully explain, but the pattern was too precise to ignore. Outside, the sanctuary staff had already begun discussing the strange incident from earlier that morning, the fact that Kira had reacted even without Emily present, and now, as the pieces began to come together, a new understanding started to form, one that changed the entire perspective of what they had been witnessing. Emily sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap, her thoughts racing as she tried to reconcile the past few weeks with what she now knew. And slowly, the confusion gave way to clarity, followed by something deeper, something emotional that she could not easily put into words. Kira had not been acting out. She had been trying to alert her. Every scream, every intense stare, every repeated morning reaction had been a signal, a warning that something was wrong long before any test had confirmed it. Emily felt tears well up in her eyes, not from panic, but from the overwhelming realization that the animal she had cared for all these years had, in some way, been caring for her too. Dr. Cole placed the results down gently and assured her that they would move forward immediately with the next steps, that she was not alone in this, and that early detection gave them a strong chance of a positive outcome. But even as he spoke, Emily's thoughts were already drifting back to the enclosure, to Kira, to the connection that now seemed deeper than anything she had ever understood before. For the first time since this began, the fear of the unknown was replaced with something else, a quiet sense of urgency mixed with gratitude, because what had once seemed like a frightening and confusing behavior had now become the very reason she had a chance to face what was coming before it was too late. The drive back to the sanctuary felt longer than usual, even though the distance had not changed, and Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat of the small utility vehicle, her hands resting gently against her lap as the weight of everything she had just learned slowly settled in, not all at once, but in waves that rose and fell with each passing mile. The early diagnosis meant hope. Dr. Nathan Cole had made that clear, but the thought that something had been growing inside her without her knowing was still difficult to fully grasp. And yet what stayed with her even more strongly was not the fear, but the reason it had been discovered in the first place. As they pulled into the sanctuary, the familiar sounds of birds and distant movement felt almost surreal, like stepping back into a world that had not yet caught up with what had just happened, and Emily took a slow breath before stepping out, her eyes instinctively turning toward Kira's enclosure. Word had already spread among the staff, not in detail, but enough for everyone to understand that something important had been found, and the atmosphere had shifted from concern about Kira's behavior to something much quieter, something more reflective. A few staff members offered soft smiles. Others simply nodded, but no one spoke too loudly, as if they all understood that this moment required space. Emily walked slowly along the familiar path, each step bringing her closer to the enclosure, and as she approached, she could see Kira sitting calmly near the glass, her large frame relaxed, her presence steady, so different from the intense figure she had become each morning. For a brief moment, Emily hesitated, not out of fear, but because she knew that this interaction was no longer the same as before. Everything had changed. When Kira noticed her, there was no sudden movement, no tension, just a quiet awareness as their eyes met across the distance. And for the first time in days, there was no scream. Emily moved a little closer, stopping just a few feet away, her heart beating steadily as she searched Kira's expression for something familiar, something that confirmed what she now believed to be true. Kira slowly shifted, her gaze once again focusing on Emily, but this time there was no urgency, no alarm, just a calm, steady look that felt almost intentional, as if the message had already been delivered and no longer needed to be repeated. Emily raised her hand slightly, placing it gently against the glass, and after a moment, Kira mirrored the movement, her large hand resting on the other side, the barrier between them still present, but the connection clearer than ever. Tears formed in Emily's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that the confusion and fear of the past weeks had been part of something much deeper, something that she had not understood until now. Behind her, a few staff members watched quietly, their expressions softened, no longer seeing Kira as unpredictable, but as something far more complex, far more aware than they had given her credit for. Later that afternoon, Emily met again with Dr. Cole to discuss the next steps, treatment plans, timelines, and what the coming weeks would look like. But even as they spoke, there was a new sense of determination in her voice, a clarity that had not been there before. She was not facing this alone, not in the way she had first imagined, because in some unexpected way, the first warning had already come, not from a machine, not from a test, but from a bond that no one had fully understood until now. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sanctuary, Emily took one last look toward the enclosure, and Kira remained there, calm and still, as if nothing had ever been wrong. But now Emily knew better, and that knowledge changed everything moving forward. The days that followed moved with a strange combination of urgency and stillness, as if time itself had slowed down just enough for Emily to notice every detail she had once taken for granted, from the early morning light filtering through the trees to the quiet rhythm of the sanctuary waking up, and yet beneath that calm surface, everything had changed in a way she could not ignore. Dr. Nathan Cole had already outlined the next steps, explaining that the condition they had found was treatable, especially because it had been caught so early, but it would require careful monitoring, a structured treatment plan, and time away from some of her daily responsibilities. For the first time since she started working at the sanctuary, Emily was asked to step back, not completely, but enough to focus on her health, and while she understood the necessity, the thought of being away from Kira felt heavier than she expected. Still, each morning, she found herself returning to the same spot, standing just outside the enclosure, watching quietly as the familiar moment approached, wondering if the pattern would continue or if everything had truly changed. On the first morning after the diagnosis, as the clock moved closer to 7:03, Emily stayed at a distance, her heart steady but her mind alert, and when the moment arrived, Kira looked up, her body shifting slightly as it always had, her gaze searching until it found Emily again, but this time, there was no scream. Instead, there was a pause, a long, quiet pause that seemed to stretch far beyond a few seconds, and then Kira slowly relaxed, lowering herself back down, her attention still fixed on Emily, but without the urgency that had defined the previous days. The staff, who had gathered at a distance, exchanged surprised glances, because the absence of that reaction confirmed something none of them had fully believed until now, that Kira's behavior had not been random or aggressive, but purposeful, and now that the underlying issue had been identified, the signal was no longer needed. Emily felt a deep breath leave her chest, a release she had not realized she was holding, and for the first time since this began, the tension that had surrounded those early mornings seemed to dissolve into something quieter, something more meaningful. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued, or rather, the absence of it did. Kira remained calm, steady, her behavior returning to what everyone had once known, but now there was a new awareness in the way people observed her, a respect that went beyond routine care. Conversations among the staff shifted from concern to reflection, with many of them quietly acknowledging that they had misjudged what they were seeing, that what had appeared to be a problem had in fact been a form of communication they had not understood. Dr. Cole himself returned to the enclosure one afternoon, standing beside Emily as they both watched Kira move calmly through her space, and he admitted that even with years of experience, this was something he would not easily forget, because it challenged the limits of what they believed animals could perceive. Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving Kira, knowing that this experience had changed her as well, not just in how she viewed the animals she worked with, but in how she understood connection itself. As her treatment plan began and her schedule adjusted, she made a quiet promise to herself that no matter how busy or complicated things became, she would not lose sight of what had happened here, because in a way she could not fully explain, the most important warning of her life had come from a place she had never expected, and that realization stayed with her, steady and unshakable, as she prepared for whatever came next. The following weeks unfolded in a way that Emily could only describe as both challenging and unexpectedly grounding, as her days became structured around appointments, checkups, and carefully planned routines that were very different from the fast-paced rhythm she had once known at the sanctuary. Yet through it all, there was a quiet thread that kept her anchored, something that brought her back again and again to a sense of purpose she could not fully explain. Each morning, even when she was not scheduled to work, she found herself waking just before 7 o'clock, her body still tuned to that familiar moment, and more often than not, she would make her way to the sanctuary, standing at a distance where she could see Kira without disrupting the routine that had now returned to calm. The absence of those intense reactions had become its own kind of confirmation, a silent reassurance that what needed to be discovered had already come to light, and that realization gave Emily a sense of peace that balanced the uncertainty of everything else she was facing. As her treatment began, there were days when she felt tired, days when the weight of it all seemed heavier than she expected, but even on those days, the thought of Kira remained steady in her mind, not as a reminder of fear, but as a source of strength, something that reminded her that she had been given a chance, an early warning that many people never receive. Back at the sanctuary, the staff had also changed in subtle ways, their conversations more thoughtful, their approach to the animals more attentive, as if this experience had opened their eyes to a level of awareness they had not fully considered before. Dr. Nathan Cole continued to monitor Emily's progress closely, always calm, always clear, explaining each step with care, and with every update, the outlook remained positive, reinforcing the importance of having caught the condition early. One afternoon, after a particularly long appointment, Emily returned to the sanctuary, and decided to walk a little closer than she had in recent days, stopping once again near the glass where she and Kira had shared that quiet moment before. Kira was there, resting peacefully, her presence calm and steady, and when she noticed Emily, she lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting Emily's with a softness that felt almost familiar. Emily stepped closer, raising her hand once again, placing it gently against the glass, and just like before, Kira responded, her large hand resting against the barrier in the same spot, the simple gesture carrying more meaning than words ever could. There was no urgency now, no tension, just a quiet connection that felt deeper than anything Emily had experienced before, and in that moment, she allowed herself to fully feel the emotion she had been holding back, the gratitude, the relief, the overwhelming understanding that this bond had changed the course of her life in a way she could never have predicted. A few visitors nearby paused to watch, unaware of the full story, simply seeing a woman and a gorilla sharing a quiet moment. But for Emily, it was something far greater, something that represented not just connection, but awareness, trust, and a kind of communication that existed beyond language. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the enclosure, Emily remained there for a few moments longer, her thoughts calm, her breathing steady, and for the first time since everything had begun, she felt fully present, not caught between fear and uncertainty, but grounded in the knowledge that she was moving forward with clarity and support, and that in some extraordinary way, the one who had first recognized the danger had never needed words to be understood. As the weeks continued to pass, the rhythm of Emily's life began to settle into something more balanced, a steady blend of treatment, recovery, and quiet moments that allowed her to reflect on everything that had happened. And with each passing day, the uncertainty that once filled her thoughts slowly gave way to a growing sense of strength. The updates from Dr. Nathan Cole remained encouraging, each checkup reinforcing that the early detection had made a meaningful difference. And while the process was not always easy, there was a clear path forward, one that Emily followed with determination and a quiet sense of gratitude that stayed with her in even the smallest moments. At the sanctuary, life had returned to its familiar pace, but there was a noticeable shift in how the staff approached their work, a deeper awareness that seemed to guide their actions, as if the experience with Kira had changed not only their understanding, but their perspective as well. Emily began to spend more time there again, gradually easing back into her routine, not rushing, not forcing anything, but allowing herself to reconnect with the place that had always felt like home. Each visit brought a sense of calm, especially when she stood near Kira's enclosure, where the atmosphere remained peaceful, the earlier tension replaced by something far more meaningful. One morning, as the light filtered softly through the trees, Emily arrived just before 7 o'clock, standing quietly as she had so many times before, her eyes focused on Kira, who was already awake, sitting calmly in her usual spot. There was no anticipation of a reaction now, no uncertainty, just a quiet understanding that whatever had needed to be communicated had already been shared. As the clock reached that once significant moment, nothing dramatic happened, no sudden movement, no sound that echoed across the enclosure, just a simple glance from Kira, her eyes meeting Emily's with a calm recognition that felt steady and complete. Emily smiled softly, placing her hand against the glass, and once again, Kira responded, her large hand resting gently on the other side. The same gesture that had come to mean so much, not because it was unusual, but because of everything it now represented. It was not just a connection, it was a confirmation, a quiet acknowledgement of something deeper than either of them could express in words. Visitors nearby paused to watch, some smiling at the peaceful interaction, unaware of the story behind it, while others simply observed in silence, drawn in by the calm presence of both the woman and the animal. Later that day, Emily joined Dr. Cole for another follow-up, and as they reviewed the latest results, there was a shared understanding between them, a recognition that this journey, while unexpected, had unfolded in a way that brought clarity rather than fear. Dr. Cole admitted that he had shared the case with a few colleagues, not as a mystery, but as a reminder that sometimes the boundaries of understanding are not as fixed as they seem, and that there are moments when observation must go beyond the obvious. Emily listened quietly, knowing that for her, The lesson had already taken root in a way that would stay with her long after everything else had passed. As the sun began to set once again over the sanctuary, casting a warm golden light across the landscape, Emily took a slow walk along the path, pausing one last time near the enclosure, where Kira remained calm and steady, her presence unchanged, yet now carrying a meaning that could never be overlooked again. And in that quiet moment, Emily realized that what had once been a source of confusion had become one of the most important turning points of her life, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful warnings do not come from what we expect, but from a connection we never knew we needed until it changed everything. The final stage of Emily's journey did not arrive with a single dramatic moment, but rather through a series of quiet confirmations that slowly built into something powerful, something lasting, as the days turned into weeks. And the weeks into months, each one carrying her further away from the uncertainty that had once defined her life and closer to a future she could now clearly see. Her treatment continued under the careful guidance of Dr. Nathan Cole, and with every follow-up appointment, the results brought encouraging news, reinforcing what had once seemed almost impossible, that something discovered so early, so unexpectedly, could be managed with confidence and hope. Emily returned to the sanctuary more frequently now, not just as a visitor, but gradually stepping back into her role, reconnecting with the work that had always given her purpose. And yet everything felt different, not in a way that distanced her, but in a way that deepened her understanding of every moment she experienced there. The sounds, the routines, the quiet interactions with the animals all carried a new meaning, shaped by what she had been through and what she had learned. And at the center of it all was Kira, calm and steady as ever, her presence unchanged, yet now carrying a significance that went far beyond the ordinary. One morning, long after the events that had first brought everything into motion, Emily arrived at the sanctuary before sunrise, the sky just beginning to lighten as she walked the familiar path toward the enclosure. There was no anticipation of anything unusual, no tension in the air, just a quiet sense of peace that had settled into her routine. As she approached, Kira was already awake, sitting near the glass, her posture relaxed, her gaze steady, and when their eyes met, there was an immediate recognition, a calm connection that did not need to be explained. Emily stepped closer, raising her hand once again, placing it gently against the glass, and without hesitation, Kira mirrored the gesture, her large hand resting in the same spot, the barrier still there, but no longer something that felt like distance. It was simply part of the space they shared, a boundary that did not diminish the connection between them. For a moment, everything else faded away, the sounds of the sanctuary, the movement of people in the distance, even the passage of time itself seemed to slow, leaving only that quiet exchange, simple yet profound in a way that words could never fully capture. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude rise within her, not just for the outcome of her treatment, not just for the chance to move forward, but for the way it had all unfolded, for the unexpected path that had led her to this moment, and for the understanding that sometimes the most important signals in life do not come from where we expect them. Behind her, a few staff members paused, watching the scene with quiet respect, aware of the story that had taken place, aware of what this moment represented, not just for Emily, but for all of them. It was a reminder that awareness, connection, and trust can exist